Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Andrew Stott and I'm the Emperor of Stomaria. Today I want to discuss Stomaria's greatest mistake.
This is how nations are built and empires are forged. For every nation that becomes integrated into the empire, for every territory that we acquire, for every citizen that joins us, for every drop of water we collect, for every seed that we sow, for every watt of energy we produce, for every silver bar that we stamp, we are securing our future.
So a few months ago I had the intention of putting together a video that detailed the history of Stomaria, and this would go from our foundation date in 2019 all the way up to our 4-year anniversary in 2023, and it would be released on the 4-year anniversary of Stomaria. And this intention was well-meaning, but unfortunately on the lead up to our 4-year anniversary we also had the Imperial Summit, and this took precedence over everything else to do with Stomaria. We had to get the woodland ready, the territory ready, because that's where the event was being held. And so this all got put on the back burner, and I never really gave it a second thought until about a week ago, when we were contacted by someone who was doing a project for their university, their school. They're doing some sort of coursework, and they were putting together a piece for micronations or nations or nation builders, and they were interested in learning more about us, and they sent us a list of questions. Now this isn't unusual. Over the last 4 years or so we've had these kind of requests many times, and we do try to send them as much information as we can. It's not like a publicity thing, it's not a media thing, it's just helping someone out with their schoolwork in as much as we can. But that will by the by. One of the questions that they asked was what the biggest hurdle was for us in terms of how far we've come, what was the biggest roadblock, which was the biggest speed bump. And this got me thinking for a long time, because that was the one question that I didn't have an easy answer to. And so I wanted to make this video because this was the thought process that I had, and just reminiscing, I suppose, about the history of Stomaria in the more contentious parts of our history. And I thought it would be quite an interesting video to make, an interesting topic to discuss, because there are quite a few things that we can discuss, as should be quite evident by the thumbnail of this particular video. So with that in mind, without having to waffle on into this intro longer than I need to, because this is going to be an exceptionally long video, let's get started. So in 2021, we started to establish relations with a micronation called Eternia. And we did so because even though there were some relatively stark differences in terms of our approach and our ideology, there were some similarities. The desire to acquire private freehold land that could be utilised, the desire to establish new industries, the establishment of a trade network of some description. So we wanted to try to build ties with Eternia. But throughout that period, it always felt a bit one-sided. For instance, when I agreed to be interviewed by AP of Eternia, he didn't actually allow us to use any of the footage from that interview for our YouTube channel. And when the video was actually fully published on Eternia's YouTube channel, he didn't credit us in any way, which is, I think, relatively standard practice if you're going to be interviewing someone in that way. There was also the artwork that we commissioned on behalf of Eternia, in which the final design, once it was sent, wasn't even acknowledged, and we certainly never got any thanks for it. And of course, there was the debacle, which was the trade deal, which ultimately led us to publishing a video in which we condemned Eternia. So initially we agreed on a token exchange. We would send a silver Stomarian stater coin and some merchandise to Eternia, and Eternia would send us some copper ingots. We prepared and sent our package to Eternia on the 1st of December 2021. Eternia received that package on the 9th of December 2021 and sent a message to us saying that the ingots were ready. It was just putting the final touches on it, and it would be sent in the following week. After 4 months of delays, I still gave AP the benefit of the doubt. In fact, I reached out to him to suggest that we have a meeting with the other leaders of the member states of the Empire so that we can continue to foster closer ties while this trade deal was going through, and hopefully would be completed in the following weeks. AP was all too happy to accept that invitation, and so I went to the member states of the Empire to discuss the matter with them. Now, once they caught wind of the delay in this trade deal, they probed further. And ultimately, I had to go back to AP to go over some of the concerns that the member states of the Empire had. This wasn't an assault on Eternia, it wasn't an attack on Eternia. There were just some genuine, very reasonable reservations that we wanted to go through, that I just wanted to iron out so that we could move forward together with us all on the same page. So in addition to the outstanding trade agreement, which by itself was a major source of concern, there were 3 other issues that the member states of the Empire wanted further clarity on. The first was professionalism. A lot of the earlier content that AP of Eternia put out on his YouTube channel was quite goofy, it was quite meme-like, and the member states of the Empire simply wanted more information about how serious Eternia was about trying to achieve its goals. Nothing major, pretty simple, standard stuff. The second point they wanted clarity on is the structure of Eternia. So Eternia and Stomaria are both empires. However, the structure of Eternia differs from Stomaria in that Eternia is looking to build a homogeneous cultural identity, whereas Stomaria is a nation of nations, in that we have various cultures, various identities, and we encourage those to thrive. And a lot of the member states of the Empire thought that Eternia's model was somewhat of an antithesis of what we were trying to build, and they just wanted more clarity on how that would work going forward. And the third point was the cost-effective nature of the actual trade agreements going forward. Once this token trade agreement was concluded, then how were we going to proceed? There has to be a reasonable, cost-effective way to make these exchanges, otherwise it doesn't become worthwhile. And these were all perfectly reasonable, valid points. Unfortunately, AP's response was less than encouraging. Rather than trying to put our very genuine and very reasonable concerns at ease, AP decided that these kinds of queries, these kinds of questions, were very hurtful to him. And rather than address them, he decided instead, not once mentioning the conclusion of the trade agreement, to wish us all well for the future. So although we were relatively taken aback by this response, since we had spent the better part of half a year trying to establish closer ties with Eternia, we decided to try to wrap up the trade deal as quickly as possible so that we could part ways as amicably as possible. But AP, unfortunately, had other ideas. 4 months after AP received our package, received our goods, and told us that the ingots were ready to go, we still had not received them. And he claimed that he did not have time to finish the package. What he did have time for, apparently, was some 55 hours of live streams for his YouTube channel. Many of these videos, of course, involve AP stood in the middle of a woodland digging a hole. In response to this, I said that if the package that he was intending to send us was not ready, then forget it. We don't want it. We don't need it. It was a token arrangement that was supposed to lead to closer ties between Stomaria and Eternia. That is no longer happening. It is a pointless endeavour, and we are not going to wait around for it. So instead, just send us our own goods back. His response to that was that he didn't have the money to send the package. And again, during this same time period, he had spent some $10,000 or more on a plot of land. He had posted a video in which he was celebrating that David the blacksmith, a former Eternian citizen, had donated $400 to Eternia. And of course, he also announced that he was attending MicroCon 2022, traveling across the United States and paying however many hundreds of dollars to actually attend this event. But he still did not have the funds available to send us our own goods back. And to top it all off, he made it very clear that he was not going to be held to a deadline and was going to send us the package whenever suited him. So after trying for weeks to resolve this privately, I made it clear to AP that I was finished playing games. He was taking advantage of me and of Stomaria, of our goodwill, of our patience, and he didn't think that we would make a fuss. He didn't think that we would call him out on it. And we did exactly that. And what's interesting about this is that even though I had made my intentions clear, I had told AP point blank that we were going to publish a statement about this, he still did not think that it was going to be worthwhile contacting other Eternians about this matter. And this was self-evident, because when we published the actual video, the condemnation video of Eternia, we received an outpouring of support. And amongst these were Eternian citizens, including none other than David the blacksmith. And several of these Eternian citizens actually offered to pay for this package to get shipped to us. And I declined this opportunity because it was not their debt to pay. It was AP's. It was his responsibility, no one else's. And what's interesting, especially from David the blacksmith, who was helping to create these ingots for Eternia, he told me that AP had told him that everything was fine, that there weren't any problems, that things were going swimmingly with Stomaria. No one in Eternia knew what was going on. And this was a bit of a shock, I think, to a lot of people, especially people in Eternia, because I received no end of apologies and messages of sympathy and support from citizens and supporters of Eternia, as well as from a wide swathe of people outside of Eternia and outside of Stomaria. But this wasn't the end of the story, because we still wanted to have an international trade deal. And we approached David the blacksmith, who made ingots, and we asked him if he'd be happy to send us some of these ingots directly in exchange for silver Stomarian stater coins. And he accepted. He agreed. He was happy to have that arrangement. However, once AP heard about this, he tried to intervene. He told David to cancel the agreement, to break his word, to do to us what AP had already done. And this put David in a bit of a bind, because he had already agreed to engage in this transaction. And for AP to come along and tell him to stop it was not something that he was prepared to do. So AP gave him the ultimatum, and David decided, on balance, that he would simply leave Eternia. What's more, not only did he leave Eternia, but he founded his own nation, the Republic of Vesta. And the Republic of Vesta quickly joined the Empire of Stomaria as an observer state. So because AP broke his word and then refused to send our goods back, we had to publish a condemnation video about Eternia. And then he decided to try to interfere with a private exchange between ourselves and David in order to actually complete a trade agreement with someone in the United States, and consequently, he lost one of his biggest financial backers and most valuable citizens. But that is still not the end of the story. Because David has a heart of gold, he wanted to leave Eternia as amicably as possible, and so he actually sent AP some money as a parting gift. AP took this money and he used it to send us our own package back. And then he had the audacity to actually post a video in which he claims that he had honoured the trade deal because someone else had paid for the package to be sent. And he claimed this as some sort of self-righteous martyr of Stomarian aggression, claiming that we were bullies, that we were in the wrong, that it was us that was the problem. I can't honestly tell if AP is intentionally a snake, someone that is deceitful, someone that lies, someone that manipulates, someone that tries to bend the truth to his own will in order to give himself the persona that he wants people to see, or if he's just incompetent. I honestly don't know which way it is. It might be all of them. Who's to say? But needless to say, when we received this package, and you're going to love this, this is the icing on this horrendous cake. The package consisted of a small, fragile wooden box, and in that box was a mirror attached to the box itself. There was also some vials of dirt. There was also some kind of clay block that wasn't glazed yet. And in and amongst all of this was over 2 kilograms of copper bars being sent from the United States to the United Kingdom. Now, does anyone want to take a wild guess what happened to that package when it got to my front door? I'll give you a moment. Exactly. So, having gone through the broken glass and the dust that was once a block of clay from somewhere, I managed to pull out our silver coin, our flag, and our embroidered patch. However, even now, the entire package that we sent Eternia has not come back because he actually managed to lose one of the items that we sent him. So overall, not a great experience. So, let's ask the question. Was this Stomaria's greatest mistake? Was it a mistake to trust AP? Was it a mistake to engage in this transaction? Well, the answer is obviously yes. It was yes because I actually trusted AP. I actually gave him the benefit of the doubt. It's someone that I thought I could actually work with in a very close professional capacity. And he is obviously not that guy. As I said earlier, I don't know if he's just deliberately deceitful, I don't know if he's a deliberate liar, or if he's just bumbling and incompetent. But either way, it makes for a hopeless trade partner. Now, do I regret making a public condemnation video about Eternia? No, of course I don't. We tried to settle this privately for weeks, having already waited 4 months for the conclusion of this agreement, and it just never happened. And it took another 6 months from the release of that condemnation video until we actually got our package back. And even then, it was incomplete. And this was the first time that a condemnation video like this had been published by Stomaria. We will not tolerate being wronged. We will not tolerate being lied about, intimidated, coerced, bullied, harassed, or otherwise. And AP was perhaps the first to understand that we don't take this sort of thing lying down. But as we'll see in this video, he was certainly not the last. I can already hear the pitchforks being sharpened and the torches being handed out to the angry villagers. MicroCon, the sacred cow of the Micronational community, and something that we, on balance, did not wish to attend for a very simple reason. There was no benefit in doing so for the wider Stomarian community. What benefit is there to us? So let's wind back a bit. MicroCon is a gathering of Micronations and Micronational leaders and Micronational representatives that get together on a biannual basis. Now, in our timeline, MicroCon 2022 has already happened, and MicroCon 2023, the dates and the locations, they've been announced. So, 2023 was a bit of an unusual one because, unlike previous years, they were going to have two events, one in Ypres in Belgium and one in Chicago in the United States. And this is very unusual because they have never had, to the best of my knowledge at least, two of these events going in the same year. And I don't believe they have ever had one in Europe. And so this raised an obvious question for a lot of people in the United Kingdom and in Europe. Is Stomaria going to attend? And we received about a dozen or so messages and emails from micronationalist leaders or just micronational citizens asking us if we were going to attend. And this eventually culminated in one of the event organizers of MicroCon 2023 actually inviting me himself personally. And I decided that we would make a video about this, because out of the 100 videos or so that we had already published at that point, we had never made one about MicroCon in any shape or form. However, I thought this would be as good an opportunity as ever, and so we did just that. So in this video, I put forward some very reasonable and very rational points as to why, on balance, MicroCon 2023 would simply not be worth us attending. We are trying to build something real, something genuine, something generational. We are trying to establish a community, establish a nation, establish a civilization that is aspiring to become more self-reliant and trying to attain greater amounts of self-determination through legal and legitimate means. We are trying to attain a de facto independence. We are striving for sovereignty, even if we can't necessarily attain it in the immediate term. A lot of the micronations that attend MicroCon just aren't interested in that. They're not looking to accomplish these things in any shape or form. You have a wide range of micronations trying to accomplish a wide range of topics and stand for a wide range of different things. So you have micronations that will claim fictional planets. You have micronations that use cookie dough as currency. You have micronations that have laws that revolve around Crocs and toilet paper. You have micronations that are declaring war and sanctions against other people. And the list goes on and on and on. And it's just really not relevant to what we are trying to build. And traveling to another country in order to meet these people, as lovely as I'm sure they are, it's just not worth it, because we want to focus on building something ourselves. We want to focus on trying to build ties with individuals that are like-minded. We want to build ties with nations that are like-minded. And MicroCon 2023 just doesn't present that opportunity. And that was the whole thing. That was the entire video. That was just, thanks for the invite. I hope you have a nice time, but it's really not for us because you guys are just trying to do something different. And that was it. That was the video. As a matter of fact, the only reason that I actually mentioned in the video that we would actually be interested in attending MicroCon is because of the publicity. And I even said in this video that just going to MicroCon just for that would be extraordinarily disingenuous. It would be very wrong of us to do, because we would not be there in good faith. We wouldn't be there for the same reasons that others are. And again, I made this very, very clear in the video. However, what is quite interesting is that I wanted to see if I could find references to MicroCon 2022 or MicroCon 2023 in traditional media, anywhere. So I just went into Google and I tried to find references to MicroCon 2022 and MicroCon 2023. And I could find next to nothing. Certainly from any traditional media source of any kind of description. There's a lot of micronational forums and websites that talk about it, obviously, but there's nothing from anyone else, and I thought that was a bit odd. So I went onto YouTube instead, and I thought, well, maybe there was a very popular YouTuber or something that went to MicroCon 2022 or went to the Chicago MicroCon 2023 because that's already happened, and maybe they have put something together there. And again, I just couldn't find anything. In fact, when I actually searched for MicroCon 2023 in YouTube, the most popular videos regarding MicroCon 2023 is, would you believe it, Slowjamastan and their announcement that they're attending MicroCon 2023. But after that, it's our video on MicroCon 2023. So in terms of media exposure, at this point in time at least, we have attracted more attention by denying an invitation to MicroCon by saying that we didn't want to attend MicroCon than we would have done had we attended MicroCon. Now, I'm sure there must be something going on there, in the sense that there must be like footage waiting in the wings, ready to be released. Maybe they've like signed some sort of contract in which they say don't release anything, don't publish anything until we've had a chance to review it, or we've had a chance to say something about it first, or whatever else. There must be something going on, because there's no way that this hasn't been reported somewhere by someone. But for the immediate term, the only references I can find to MicroCon 2023, certainly any of the popular ones, include Slowjamastan's announcement that they're attending, and ours, and I just thought that was a little bit funny. But to get things a little bit back on track regarding MicroCon 2023, in that video, as I said, we did not say anything that we have not been saying for literally years at that point. We've always been very selective with who we associate with. We've always been very selective with the kinds of nations that we want to build relations with. This is nothing new. I have literally talked about this for years. This is why we have such few relationships with other people and other nations and other communities, because we are exceptionally selective with who we work with, and we don't see any benefit in trying to associate with people that aren't going to further our cause. What benefit is there to us at the end of the day? But that all by the by, the reason I wasn't fussed about making that video is because, as I say, I have said it 100 times over on our YouTube channel. And the only difference here is that I specifically referenced MicroCon. And this obviously was an issue for some people. So the next day, or maybe it was the day after, I started to receive a flurry of messages and emails from people who were sending me screenshots of people commenting on a Facebook post. And that Facebook post was a link to our YouTube video, MicroCon 2023. And this group that it was being posted in was MicroCon 2022, I think. So it was where all the attendees of MicroCon 2022 had been gathering and organising and discussing this, that and the other. And so obviously, as you can imagine, it created quite a stir. And there was a lot of relatively well-known Micronations jumping on board, offering their 2 cents. Might be snide remarks or condemnations or angry emojis, but it was something. They were expressing themselves in some form or another over this video. So you had you had Aerica, you had Westarctica, you had Ladonia. I think eventually you had Ruritania. You had Dracul. You had so many different Micronations, including even Molossia, commenting on this video. And I was not particularly concerned as such. I wasn't surprised in the sense that these micronationalists had heard of Stomaria or were familiar with Stomaria in some form or another. I was always quite confident that most, if not all, people by that point had probably at least come across us in some form or another, because we are quite well known, comparatively speaking, I suppose is what I'd probably say. But what I probably wasn't quite prepared for was just how thin-skinned and fragile these people appeared to be, some of them at least. It seemed to me that sort of inadvertently rattling the cage by mentioning MicroCon, the sacred cow of the micronational community. Don't criticize MicroCon. Attend MicroCon or else. I thought it was a bit funny. And I actually made a follow-up video. And I couldn't help but smile at this reaction. Even now, I find it funny that we got on this video, because we literally said nothing particularly critical of anything or anyone. We literally, when we talk about people using cookie dough as currency, or having laws regarding crocs and toilet roll, or claiming uninhabited land masses or fictional planets, this is all true. It's all factual. It's just a undeniable, undebatable fact. I mean, the fact that you'd even have to mention that and get that kind of reaction going, oh, he's a bit of a snob, isn't he? Because he's highlighting exactly what we do. What can you say to that? Anyway, the point is, when this video was published, Slowjamastan, which was quite an up-and-coming micronation, it's kind of stormed the scene a little bit. and they featured quite heavily in MicroCon 2022. In fact, probably one of the most iconic images of MicroCon 2022 will forever be this photo. As much as a lot of micronationalists that attended MicroCon 2022 were probably rather it wasn't, or maybe they do, I don't know. But that is the image that's always stuck with me, and that's the image that, you know, I can find online when I search for MicroCon 2022. So, you know, but this is I mean, it kind of encapsulates for me quite well the reason as to why I don't really want to attend, because I don't want to be associated with that. If you want to do that, fine. If you want to have fun doing whatever, fine. I just don't want to be associated with it. I don't want Stomaria to be associated with it. There's nothing wrong with that. So chill, relax, it's okay. But the reason that this was such an issue, or sort of bigged up in some way, is because it was taken up one step further. When Slowjamastan, as I say, we caught their attention, and they actually made a musical rendition, a parody of our video. And even to this day, it gets played. There's clips of it across Stomaria's YouTube videos since we discovered this little rendition. We try to insert snippets of it where we can, because frankly, it didn't gain the traction that it deserved. I think it was very poor marketing on Slowjamastan's part. I think it should have been blown up a lot bigger than it was. And it's a shame that it didn't. But that will by the by. Once this was released, and once we had published the second video, MicroCon 2023 Remix, I think it was, or version 2, or Mark 2 or something, I can't even remember now. But that was again shared in the MicroCon group, the Facebook group, and it went even further, and even more people jumped on board. And then, in between the more light-hearted comments, or in between, any other of the comments being made, snide remarks or otherwise, there were some that were a bit, well, misinformed, to say the least. I mean, some people obviously not even watched the video and started claiming things like, I didn't attend because there was no financial incentive to do so, or some ridiculous nonsense like that. It's like, pay me or I won't attend MicroCon. Travis, actually, of Westarctica, accused me of having a tiny pocketbook. Apparently, I had this confirmed to me since, that he was basically calling me poor, saying I didn't have enough money to attend MicroCon, and that's the reason I wasn't going. Which actually leads me quite neatly onto the next topic, the next episode in this little series that we've got going. But before I wrap that up, I did want to sort of ask the question, was this Stomaria's biggest mistake? Was publishing this video, publishing the MicroCon 2023 video, my biggest mistake? Stomaria's biggest mistake? And the answer is no, because we said nothing in that video that we have not said 100 times before and 100 times since. The only difference is that we referenced MicroCon. That's the only reason it attracted the kind of attention that it did. Had I just made a generic video going, this is what we stand for, this is what we believe, as I've done before, then they wouldn't have been fussed. But because I mentioned MicroCon, as I say, the sacred cow, it was a case of, let's all pile on in some form or another. It wasn't necessarily all in a hostile or aggressive way. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was really unconcerned by it, because despite what a lot of people like to think, the storm in the teacup sorts, the mountain out of a molehill kind of territory, trying to milk it for all it's worth, to stir up some drama and a bit of excitement in the Micronational community. It really didn't mean anything. It was, over and done before most people had even seen the video. So yeah, in terms of being the biggest mistake we ever made, absolutely not. I don't even consider it a mistake in any shape or form. I would do it again, happily. In fact, I did, obviously. I made a second one to double down on everything that I said. But anyway, yeah, that all by the by. This one was a lot more lighthearted than the others, I think, because, as I say, a lot of people seem to pinpoint this as one of the biggest mistakes that Stomaria ever made, criticising MicroCon, denying an invitation to MicroCon, and it wasn't at all. I mean, I couldn't care less, as the people that follow us, they equally couldn't care less. So yeah, moving on to the next one. So as I say, this leads more or less directly from the MicroCon 2023 video, in that they seem to be quite well linked. Now, Travis from Westarctica was the host of MicroCon 2022, and he is obviously someone that also saw the MicroCon 2023 video that we put out. Now, because he took exception to this video, he thought that the rational, adult thing to do would be to post an article about Stomaria on Westarctica's Wikipedia site. Now, for an article about Stomaria, it starts off well enough. The Empire of Stomaria is a micronation based in the United Kingdom. Now, unfortunately, that's where the reference to Stomaria in particular ends, and it instead descends into an entire essay in which Travis accuses me of being a fascist that has been inspired by neo-Nazism and white supremacism. And once more, most UK political commentators agree with that assessment. And in and amongst the constant accusations of fascism, neo-Nazism and white supremacism is some of the most vile commentary that I think I've ever seen written about me. And that is to say, I don't think I've ever encountered anyone so shameless that they would actually put their name to such a libelous article and then think that it was a good idea to publish it to the wider world. Now, initially, I didn't actually see this article. Someone else did, and they sent me a link. Now, when I first read it, I just assumed that someone else had gone onto Westarctica's Wikipedia site and they had put this article together in order to troll us. And I thought, well, surely it would just be removed as soon as the editor-in-chief, who is obviously Travis, sees it. But no, the logs show that it was actually Travis that put it together start to finish. And so instead of going to Travis directly, I thought it would be better to go to someone else within Westarctica. Travis had obviously written the article. I didn't consider him to be a very reasonable or rational person for obvious reasons, and so maybe someone else in Westarctica would be able to assist with this particular predicament. As with Aeternia, we tried to handle this privately. So, I contact Jordan Farmer, who I believe is the Prime Minister of Westarctica. So I sent Jordan a message explaining that I would like the references to me being a fascist or being inspired by neo-Nazism and white supremacism removed. And if that is not done, then I will make a public statement on this matter. Now, Jordan initially flatly refused to do anything about it. He refused to get involved. In fact, and I kid you not, he actually warned me not to go head-to-head with Travis, because he has a background in military intelligence, don't you know? And what's more, the people that do go head-to-head with him, they don't last long in micronationalism. Ooh. However, before I could even respond to that particular message, he sent another, stating that he had just gone to see the article and had to apologise for its tone, and omitted the references to being a Nazi, a fascist, and all the rest of it. However, what was interesting is that something that he thought quite prudent to bring up was that even though that he was representing someone, a nation and a person, who has literally just published an article about me in which they accused me of being a fascist, a Nazi, and a white supremacist, he still insisted that the word Jordan, the name Jordan, was very rude. I shouldn't call him Jordan. I shouldn't call him what he's called. I couldn't use his name. Instead, what I should be referring to him as is your grace or your excellency. I just don't understand how these people are wired. It all just seems very bizarre to me, because in all the years that I have been the Emperor of Stomaria, I have never once insisted that anyone call me your Imperial Majesty or the Emperor or whatever else. In fact, when people do refer to me as that for any length of time, I do make a point of saying you don't actually have to refer to me as your Imperial Majesty or the Emperor or whatever else. I am the Emperor of Stomaria because Stomaria is an empire. But titles, much like medals, they just don't mean anything to me. What matters is practical, real-world development. What matters is reality. And reality, in this case, is someone publishing an article about me in which they are trying to smear me. They are attempting the worst kind of character assassination. And his primary concern, point one, refer to me as your grace or your excellency, because that's what's really important here. Statesmanship. I think maybe he should have a word with Travis about statesmanship. But that's all by the by. Travis was obviously contacted about this because he sent us an email. And in that email, he offered his apologies. And his reason, his rationale that he gave for him making the article, for him publishing it in the way that he did, was because he said, and I quote, "I don't like you." That was the premise that he used to write the article in the way that it was written. He thought that under the guise of "I don't like you" and its colour in my vision, that he could just write whatever he fancied. Fascism, neo-Nazism, white supremacism, whatever, it doesn't matter. And this isn't an opinion piece from Travis. He tries to pass it off as fact. He actually cites that UK political commentators, or more specifically, most UK political commentators, agreed with his assessment that I am a fascist. And this is obviously not true. This is a lie. This is a fabrication. This is a libelous article from start to finish. In fact, the article, notwithstanding all of the references to fascism, neo-Nazism, white supremacism, was so wrong that I don't think there was a single aspect of it, bar the first sentence, that was actually right. In fact, in the article, he can't even get the flag right. That is just how incompetent Travis is. That's just how dishonest Travis is. This is just how much of a vile bully Travis is. And by Jordan's own admission, that is exactly what he is. If he doesn't like someone, he tries to force them out. He tries to force people away. Now, the problem that Travis, much like Jordan and anyone else in the Micronational community that doesn't particularly like Stomaria, has, is that Stomaria is different for two very important reasons. You can't force me out of something that I'm not a part of, any more than you can force me out of a building that I'm not even standing in. But more than this, unlike perhaps many others that have come before and gone head-to-head with Travis and been forced out, Stomaria has carved out a very sizable support base and following in its own right. And we've done so precisely because we're not part of this ivory tower old guard. We're not part of the sycophantic circle that surrounds Travis and others like him. I couldn't care less about affiliation or association with the upper echelons of the Micronational community. They do not have my respect and they do not have my admiration. And this gives us complete and total freedom in terms of speaking our minds and in terms of speaking the truth. And when we have that kind of freedom, we can challenge these people. Travis being a prime example of that. I will not hesitate to call anyone out that has wronged us. I will not hesitate to defend my name and Stomaria from these people who obviously seek to undermine us. But to get back to the article, this had not been resolved. They had amended the article, but it was still visible. The original content was still visible and is still visible to this day. You can go and see it now. So what has happened is that they had just partially covered it up. This reference to me being a neo-Nazi, being a fascist, being a white supremacist is still in the public space. And so, having already tried to resolve this privately, I opted to make a public statement about it. As I say, the freedom to be able to do so is incredibly liberating. I do not have to be answerable to anyone for anything if I believe that what we are doing is just and it is right. And it is just and it is right. No one should be able to write these sorts of things about someone else. A complete fabricated, libelous article like this will be called out. And once we published the video, it was very gratifying to see such an outpour of support for Stomaria. Travis is obviously a very well-known micronationalist, and Westarctica is obviously a very well-known micronation. But there are those around him that would defend him if they witnessed him punch a baby in the face. So it's not surprising that exceptionally few micronations from those circles actually came out to condemn the article itself. Now, had it been the other way around, had the shoe been on the other foot, and this goes for pretty much every example in this entire series of episodes that I'm doing, had I taken Eternia's merchandise and not sent them anything, had I written an article about Travis about how he was a neo-Nazi and a fascist, I suspect they would probably have something to say about that. But because it is something that has happened to Stomaria, it's obviously something we deserve. And that's the kind of mentality that these people have. And that is, again, the reason why they just don't have my respect, because they don't value truth, they don't value integrity, they don't value honesty. They value sycophantic loyalty and nothing else beyond that. We are still here, and no amount of libelous articles are going to dissuade us from carrying on what we're going to do. And we will continue to call out anyone and everyone that tries to label us as something that we're not, especially if those things are some of the most vile ideologies, the most vile terms that you can use to try and smear someone in the public space because you don't like them. But I suppose to wrap this up a little bit further, something that I noticed in the actual article initially, something that struck me, was that the term failure and ego, those were terms that were used repeatedly, almost as much as the term fascist, neo-Nazi and white supremacist. And I always found that to be very odd, even since when the article first came out. It was just a bit curious, because it seemed to rely very heavily on those sort of concepts. And I couldn't quite figure out why, in the sense that you obviously didn't like me and you wanted to make it look as bad as possible, but it just seems an overly focused attention on these terminologies. And as it turns out, a few weeks later after he published this article, and this again is in the public space, he got a divorce. And I imagine he was just projecting at the time. And if you look into Travis's own life, it is just one massive failure after another in terms of acting careers, in terms of Micronations, in terms of relationships. I mean, this obviously isn't the first divorce Travis has gone through. And so perhaps a lot of projection was forced into this article out of a frustration in his personal life. That is my 2 cents on that anyway. That's the only reason I could think that that would be written in the way that it was. And so I suppose there is a lesson to be learnt in there in some form or another, in that people in glass houses should not throw stones, because if you're going to go around calling someone a failure who has had their ego dented by one thing or another, even if it is a complete fabrication and something that you've made up in your own mind, maybe look in the mirror once in a while, because clearly you've got some things to work on. So, was this Stomaria's greatest mistake? Well, that's an obviously resounding no, because we did not write the article, we did not initiate this in any shape or form. We had never had any communication with Travis beforehand. We had only ever seen him comment on posts associated with us secondhand, never on our own. And so we had no ties with him whatsoever, but he still felt the need to write this article. And we merely responded to it. We responded to it privately. We tried to have it resolved privately. It was not resolved privately, and so we went to the public to make a statement, to make it clear that the article was libelous, it was not true, and anyone that came across it should be referenced to that video, because it explains in detail what the problem is. And then I suppose they can also be referenced to this particular video where we explain it again here. And so yeah, that's all there is to say about that one. It was not a mistake on our part in the least. It was certainly a mistake on Travis's part, and whether or not he'll ever feel the ramifications of it, I don't know, but I suspect karma will find its way around sooner or later. So with all of that said, on to the next one. So this was the first time that an internal issue had come up within the Empire of Stomaria, at least one in a meaningful way. That said, the actual cause of this is just not that interesting, and even at the time I struggled to make it interesting. And I'll get on to all that in a minute. But the long and the short of it is, there was Molossia, who at the time was an observer state of the Empire of Stomaria. Now they had joined as an observer state, the term had not changed, the terminology that we used had not changed, and they had remained as such for 10 months. However, after those 10 months, Molossia decided that the term was not something that they wanted to be applied to them anymore. So they requested that I change it. I reviewed the request, and I couldn't find a more appropriate term, and so I said, instead, what we'll do is we will simply refer to everyone as member states. The detailed structure of Stomaria concerning observer states, provinces, protectorates, and all that jazz, that will still be in the public space, in the sense we'll have it on our website where it has a detailed breakdown of the Empire. But in terms of our publications going forward, just to keep things simple, we'll just refer to everyone collectively as member states. Thought that was a very fair compromise, very simple compromise that was, ignored or rejected. whichever way you want to phrase it. And this consequently led to 4 or 5 hour conversation on a group chat, which led to Bran Howell and Molossia leaving the Empire of Stomaria. And it all stemmed from this term observer state. It all stemmed from the desire not to be affiliated with the term observer state. And that was it. And this is why it's just not very interesting. And the reason I'm only just giving a brief rundown of this now is because I had to effectively rewrite what I was going to do here. Because initially I was just going to have this as a very short blurb in terms of me explaining what happened and then moving on to the next one, just as I have with Westarctica and Eternia and MicroCon. I was just going to talk about it, move on to the next one. However, unfortunately, there was a video that Neve of Molossia posted, and I initially didn't know about this video, in the sense that Raoul told me about it, King Raoul of Wayward. He told me about it when I went down to Southwood on one of my many trips down there, and he said, have you seen the video? I said no. He told me what was in the video. We had a little bit of a laugh about it, didn't think too much of it. Another probably 6 weeks later, I actually saw the video, but I wasn't obviously paying that close attention. I was obviously doing something else at the time, because I went back to look at it more recently, as in only a few days ago, and I actually, sat down, listened to what I had to say, because I was making this video and I thought maybe there's some useful content in there, a different perspective, perhaps. But the issue that I had is that it wasn't a different perspective, they were just lies, and that didn't sit right with me. It's just literally one after the other, and I couldn't let that slide. I mean, it's a very popular video. In fact, it's the only video that they have, aside from their national anthem, on their YouTube channel, and it's based on a complete fabrication of what actually happened. And this is the thing, I can actually prove it. And unfortunately, that's what I'm just going to have to do in this particular video, which means it's going to be dragged out far longer than I wanted it to. But this is as good an opportunity as ever to go through the detailed account using actual quotes from the actual conversation in order to prove that what I said originally in my original video about this civil war, about this schism, took place. So that's what we're going to have to do.
I've already seen the Emperor's video on what he calls Stomaria's first civil war. In this video, released back in December, Andrew tells his side of the story of why Molossia and Bran Howell left.
So what this boiled down to was Stomaria's structure and the terminologies that we use, in particular the term observer state.
I just want to start off by saying that this is untrue. Yes, the way the term observer state is used did play a part in the events that led to Molossia's decision to secede, though it was only actually a very small part of the larger reason why we left.
From start to finish, the entire conversation that we had in the Imperial Court meeting, in the Imperial Court chat, was about the term observer state. It was an incredibly perplexing situation for many members of the Imperial Court, and Lord Harvey himself actually asked point blank what it was Neve wanted, and she said definitively that it was to have Molossia stopped being referred to as an observer state. As I say, the entire conversation revolved around this, and Neve herself referenced the term observer state a little under 20 times during this conversation. There was literally nothing else being discussed. And this isn't from memory. I have the conversation to hand. I looked at the entire conversation a few hours ago. There is nothing else in there. It is just about discussing the term observer state.
And an observer state is a micronation in which the highest authority of that micronation has expressed their desire to join Stomaria, to join our community, but they don't yet have that physical territory, they don't have that land yet, even though they might be striving to attain it. And that's a big part of becoming an observer state. It's sort of the entry-level kind of tier, if you like.
Wait. Of course, I already knew the definitions of provinces, protectorates, associated states, and all that, but one word I had never heard used in relation to the different types of member states was tier.
It's sort of the entry-level kind of tier, if you like.
Huh. Never realized that the Emperor considered the Kingdom of Molossia entry-level, and the use of the word tier does bring to mind some sort of ranking system that I wasn't aware existed.
I made it very clear from the very beginning that the way that Stomaria is structured is a tiered system. In fact, on the 6th of March 2022, when we were having an email conversation about this, about having Molossia become an observer state, I described the observer state as follows. Observer states consist of micronations that don't have private freehold land that could be considered a part of Stomaria's territorial empire. It's a relatively new tier that was introduced for those micronations that wanted to play a direct role in the development and expansion of the real-world community and trade network that we're looking to establish. I then said exactly the same thing on the introductory video that I made, where I announced that Molossia had become an observer state.
I realise now that I haven't actually explained what an observer state is, for those who don't already know. But the Empire of Stomaria is divided into observer states, associated states, protectorates, and provinces. An observer state is the sort of what you might call entry-level tier, in the sense that, unlike provinces, protectorates, and associated states, which all require a micronation to own private property, or for the imperial family to own private property, and for that micronation to govern it, an observer state doesn't require a micronation to hold private freehold land, but it's micronations that nevertheless want it to become part of the trade network the community got looking to build, with the intention of eventually accumulating private freehold land themselves, which they can utilise in order to help us accomplish our objectives further down the line. But at that point, they would become an observer state, they would be an associated state.
Neve watched this video and then sent me the following email. I just finished watching your most recent video where you announced Molossia's status as an observer state, and I must say that I am very pleased by the way that you have introduced us. Neve obviously knew that Stomaria worked as a tiered system and that the observer state was an entry-level tier because I had told her that and she had seen that.
I then pointed out that observer state might not even be a very good way to describe what Selassia or the other nations that don't own land are. This is the actual, widely accepted definition of observer status, according to Wikipedia. Observer status is a privilege granted by some organizations to non-members to give them the ability to participate in the organization's activities. Observers generally have a limited ability to participate in the organization, lacking the ability to vote or propose resolutions. So an observer state, to everyone not the Emperor of Stomaria, is a state that is not a member of an organization. It is just allowed to participate for some odd reason. The term observer state does not refer to a nation without land anywhere else, except for the Empire of Stomaria.
The term observer state obviously doesn't refer to a nation that doesn't have private freehold land. But then our terminologies, our use of the terms province, protectorate, associated state, emperor, empire, and whatever else is also not strictly true. We have to apply these terms in the best way that we can. So for instance, you look at the word and the term and the definition of a queen, the female ruler of an independent state, especially one who inherits the position by right of birth. Molossia is not an independent state, and Neve certainly didn't inherit any title from anyone. So Neve is clearly not a queen by our own strict definition of what a queen is. Equally, what is a kingdom? A country, state, or territory ruled by a king or queen. So if you want to use Neve's logic, then Neve is not a queen and Molossia is not a kingdom. Neither of them exist in the form that she claims. However, we take a far more rational approach to this. We are trying to apply terms that best suit what we are. We know we're not a sovereign nation in our own right. We're perfectly aware of that. And we are trying to apply terms that are the most applicable. This was already explained to her in the conversation that we had about this back in December. Indeed, Neve claimed even then that I didn't know what an observer state was and that I was just being stubborn because I wouldn't do what she wanted and change the structure of the empire. Neve then posted a link to an article in which the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, a nation without land, formed a part of the UN, and she said the following: if the United Nations can recognize a sovereign state without land as what it is, without needing to apply a census label to it, then why can't we? Her argument being very simple. There is a sovereign nation out there that doesn't have private freehold land, but they form a part of the UN, and they don't have a census label attached to it. So why can't we have that same system? That was the argument that she made. However, there was something of a flaw in that argument, as Lord Harvey of Stomaria quickly pointed out. The article actually says that the Sovereign Military Order of Malta isn't a member of the UN, they have an observer status. So you'd think at that point, before the conversation had really kicked off, we're only about 20 minutes in at this point, that this issue had already been resolved. Neve had inadvertently proven that we had the correct terminology, that what we had was not perfect because we're not an actual sovereign nation, but it is one of the most applicable, if not the most applicable terms that we could have used under the circumstances. But no, apparently, according to Neve, this just proved her point all along.
Since the so-called observer states actually made up the majority of the empire and were not just observers, but actually active participants with ostensibly a level of influence equal to the others, I suggested that coming up with a different term for us might be a good idea, so that outsiders who didn't know about the empire structure wouldn't get confused about who we are and what we do. He flat out refused to even consider coming up with an alternative term, despite the very sensible solutions from others in the meeting.
This is obviously not true. I posted an extensive message on the Imperial Court chat detailing what had been discussed the previous night, and this included the structure of Stomaria. While it wasn't on the agenda, I said that, as requested, I had taken the time to review the term observer state as a way to define nations within the empire that didn't have private freehold land. I couldn't find a more appropriate term, not least because similar terms are already used to describe sovereign nations without land in the UN, such as the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, or even sovereign nations that aren't based in Europe but are associated with the European Union, such as Canada and Japan. In short, it was a perfectly reasonable term for us to use in the context that we did, but I already knew this when I decided on the term 6 months before Sealand freely joined as an observer state. Regardless, before this entire episode occurred, I said that I would instead use the term member states to refer to everyone collectively in our publications to avoid any potential confusion from casual onlookers. This suggestion was not even acknowledged by Neve, much less approved, at least initially, which is what we'll get onto in a little bit. But the point she's trying to make about other people throwing out suggestions, which I was just casually rejecting, there was not a single alternative suggestion, not an alternative term that was suggested by anyone else at the meeting. Lord Harvey of Stomaria, he did not take issue with this at all. He was not concerned by the term observer state. He didn't understand where Neve was coming from. He thought everything was fine, just as it was. Consul David, an observer state at the time, said that he was perfectly happy with the term observer state, and it was in fact honoured to be a part of the Empire as an observer state. And interestingly, relatively recently, Consul David of the Republic of Vesta has turned the Republic of Vesta from an observer state into a member state because he did acquire private freehold land, which is the natural transition. This is what we expect to happen. Just because you're an observer state today does not mean you're going to be an observer state forever. The intention is to acquire private freehold land. That is the purpose of Stomaria. That is one of our core pillars. That is essential in order to accomplish our goals. This is why we are structured the way we are. Then you had Bran Howell that made no suggestions whatsoever. The only person that offered an alternate solution was King Raoul of Wayward. And that solution was to quote my original point and say, why don't we just do what he said there? Why don't we just use the term member state to refer to everyone in the public space? That is the only reference to an alternative term, and that alternative term was suggested by me at the very start of this conversation.
I thought everything was tied up then, that we could move forward as I had anticipated. No longer under the Imperial umbrella, but still friendly allies. The Emperor had a few projects he was interested in commissioning for me, and I figured that he'd still want to maintain a relationship with us trade-wise. After all, he has stated over and over how much he wants the Empire to be a hub for real-world trade and commerce. There are not that many micronations out there that can offer what we do, and continuing trade with us would be good for the prosperity of all nations involved. There wasn't a good reason, that I could see anyway, why Stomaria should cut all ties with us.
I must have missed the memo on this one, but it turns out that if you spend your time trying to undermine the Empire, if you spend your time saying that I'm an elitist, egocentrical tyrant because I won't do what you want, and then end up leaving the Empire because you can't get your own way, declaring that the values of your nation are no longer compatible with the Empire's, that does not make you an automatic friend or ally of the Empire, as it turns out. I know, it was news to me as well. But in all seriousness, based on the reactions and responses that I got from the remaining members of the Imperial Court once Bran Howell and Sealand actually left the Empire, there was no way that an alliance was going to take place. It would have been shot down very, very quickly. And with the incorporation of Bran Howell into Sealand as a province, I think it is, for reasons that I'll get into later, there is absolutely zero chance that Sealand will be affiliated with Stomaria in any shape or form.
A few days later, however, I got a better picture of the way the Emperor saw things. This was when the Civil War video, where the Emperor tells his version of the events, was released, on Christmas Eve, in fact. Let's get back to that.
This is probably one of the most short-lived, most mundane civil wars in human history, and I really wouldn't even be bothering making a video about it at all.
Wouldn't bother talking about this? What do you mean? The Empire lost a third of its member states basically at the same time. Why wouldn't this be news?
As I said in the clip that Neve literally just played, I didn't say that I wasn't going to talk about this at all. I just said that I didn't want to make a video about this because it wasn't that interesting. And it isn't. The Civil War video that I put out regarding Sealand and Bran Howell leaving the Empire is 18 minutes long. 5 minutes of that is dedicated to Sealand and Bran Howell leaving the Empire. The rest of it is dedicated to the reforms that we are going to be enacting in order to try to mitigate these sorts of problems in the future. Very little of it had anything to do with Bran Howell or Sealand, because there just wasn't much to talk about, because it wasn't, as I say, a very interesting conversation. And the fact is, I don't make videos for everything that happens in the Empire. Since our foundation, I have put out maybe 150 videos to date, compared to the more than 500 posts and photos that we put out across our social media platforms. videos are not the be-all and end-all in terms of discussing the developments and progress and news regarding the Empire of Stomaria. Added into the fact that all of this transpired about a week before Christmas, I was not really in a position where making a video was something that I actively wanted to do. Case in point, Neve never put out a video saying that she had left the Empire. She put up a post saying she had left the Empire. So why would I be obliged myself to put up a video?
So I looked at the request, I reviewed the request, I saw if there was any other terminologies that would be more appropriate, and because I had obviously given due diligence to the terminologies that we use already, because I don't just pick a term out of a hat and go, we'll run with this one, I couldn't find anything more appropriate, and I wasn't inclined to change the terminologies that we've been using for some 18 months now.
Alternative terms were suggested, and he made it clear from the start that he wasn't open to even consider thinking about changing it.
As I've already made clear, I reviewed the term observer states. I could not find a suitable alternative, and there was literally no suggestions from anyone else in terms of an alternative term. That is just a fact, and I suspect that is the reason that she never references this alternative term. She doesn't reference a colony, she doesn't reference an associated something or other. It just doesn't happen because, as I say, I have the conversation to hand. It's on my phone. I've looked through it several times over the last few days. There is no reference to any other term being suggested. Period.
And the reason, as I say, that I wanted to make this video is not so much because of that, because that's not very interesting, frankly.
Not very interesting? I love how he's trying to pretend that none of this bothered him, that losing 2 trusted allies at the same time, being rejected by 2 member states in front of the whole Imperial Court, was barely worth acknowledging.
Correct. It was not that interesting. And Brown Howl is most certainly not, nor has ever been, a trusted ally. They were an associated state for 5 weeks. They took 4 weeks to actually become an associated state because of the long drawn-out application process that they went through. Partly because they couldn't pull themselves together to come up with an appropriate name or flag, and also because I had grave reservations about them and had to console with King Raoul of Wayward in order to decide whether or not we were going to pursue with this at all. So no, they were never trusted, and they were very reluctantly accepted into the Empire, and again, as we'll see in a later part of this video, it was probably one of the biggest errors that I've ever made. And she seems to be talking like I was somehow humiliated in front of the Imperial Court, or something to that effect. The Imperial Court, bar Brown Howl, was behind me. They supported my position, because my position was reasonable. I was offering a solution. I was offering a genuine proposal that would have altered almost every aspect of Stomaria from the outside point of view. The term observer state would have only been referenced on our website where we had the detailed structure of Stomaria outlined, but everywhere else they would have been referred to as member states. That was my solution, that was my offer, and it was just ignored by Neve.
So what happens when Queen Neve of Selesnya is a Waywardian citizen? And this is a question that's never really come up before. And so the solution in the immediate term was simply to treat Queen Neve of Selesnya as a private citizen of Wayward. So any engagements or trade relations or anything like that that happened between Queen Neve of Selesnya and Wayward would simply be treated as an internal affair, in the sense that the Kingdom of Wayward went even further than that and doesn't recognise Selesnya as an entity in its own right, in that they recognise Queen Neve as Queen Neve. She is just Neve of Wayward.
Some of this is accurate, some of this is not, at the time of making this video. The original plan was indeed to just treat me as any other Waywardian citizen, and I'm fine with that. This keeps trading and lines of communication open between King Raoul and myself, since the Emperor doesn't have the right to dictate to Raoul how he treats his citizens. What the Emperor says here about King Raoul not recognizing Selesnya as its own entity, or me as the queen of it, is completely untrue. Wayward and Selesnya have close ties and mutual respect for one another, and King Raoul has told me straight out that he will not stop recognizing Selesnya as a genuine Micronation, an entity in its own right, just because the Emperor told him to. When we discuss trade relations between us, he might treat me as one of his citizens, but he's not going to lie to himself about who I really am. I am Queen Neve of Selesnya, and I am also a proud Waywardian citizen. I'm happy to follow his rules and his wishes while in his house, and I show him his due respect as my king when interacting with these circumstances. But Raoul knows who I am, and he knows that if he ever does want to pursue formal relations with Selesnya in the future, that we will be making negotiations from the perspective of 2 monarchs of equal standing. Though the Emperor might dearly wish that the other nations within the Empire would stop recognizing me as a real or legitimate Micronational leader, the reality is that he can't control that. He likes to think he can be the arbiter of who is and who isn't a real or serious Micronation, so that he can dismiss any criticism from people that he deems unworthy.
For a few days after Selesnya and Brown Howl left, there was some discussion as to how we should go about treating Neve of Selesnya, because Neve was a Waywardian citizen as well as the ruler of a Micronation. And so the conversation did come up. I mean, what happens in that sort of situation? And so after some deliberation, we decided that even though we would put contingency plans in place for future incidents of this nature, it would be unfair to move the goalposts at this stage. And so we simply said, okay, what we'll do is we'll have Neve being treated as a private Waywardian citizen. Simple as that. However, much like I said in the original video, and for some reason Neve wishes to deny this for whatever reason, King Raoul of Wayward, without any nudging from me, any suggestion from me, any insistence from me, came out and said that they had decided at the Round Table, that is to say the Waywoodian Round Table, effectively their parliament, they had collectively decided that Neve of Selesnya would no longer be recognised as a queen, and Selesnya would no longer be recognised as a nation. Raoul himself said that they only recognise nations that form a part of the Empire, something that he refers to occasionally as the Imperial Union. So yeah, what I said was absolutely true. Whether or not she knew about this, I don't know, but that is just a fact. I did speak to Raoul about this, and he did say that he did tell her. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean, based on the content of the video up to this point, it's perfectly possible that she's simply just denying this while knowing full well that it is true for whatever reason. But yeah, Wayward were the first to declare that they don't recognise Selesnya as a nation or Neve as queen. And it was actually this position that Wayward took which inspired us to take a harder stance ourselves when it came to abandoning the term micronationalism and micronation a little later on.
I saw how quickly Stomaria turned on Selesnya, dismissing it as a one-person project barely worth talking about, without a culture or community. My hopes were shattered. Selesnya is not, nor has it ever been, a one-person micronation.
When Selesnya started to become involved in the Empire, when we were discussing about Selesnya becoming an observer state, she said explicitly that Selesnya had no official citizens. She said it was just her and her partner, who was technically king, but by her own admission, he had no interest in actually ruling the kingdom. That is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about one-man bands or one-person micronations. There's no way to get around that. I mean, it's fine, everyone's got to start somewhere, but in terms of having entire nations and communities integrated into the Empire, we are at a point now where it does actually have to be a nation or a community, rather than just someone plus their reluctant partner. I mean, that's not a nation, that's not a community. As I say, everyone's got to start somewhere. We started much the same, but you know, we're at a point now where we want more serious contenders becoming involved within the network that we're building, the empire that we're building.
Just a few days later, most likely because of the blowback from the public, the Emperor had had enough, and he decided he was going to pick up his ball and go home.
Our decision to abandon the term micronation and micronationalism to define ourselves had literally nothing to do with Selesnya. The blowback that she's referring to was no worse than the blowback that we received when we published the Eternian video, or the Westarctican video, or the MicroCon video, or any of the other smear campaigns that are leveled against us at any random time. This is all old news to me. It's nothing new, it's nothing special, and it has no relevance on the decision that we made. And once more, like everything else I've covered in this video so far, I have proof of that. The idea of abandoning the term micronation and micronationalism to refer to ourselves has been going on for months. And more recently, I went to go see King Raoul about it before the Civil War video came out, and we discussed the issue then. And he had already told me that he had already made a video, which was due to be published later on that month, in the end of December, saying why Wayward is not a micronation. I put together a similar video not long after that, and published it just before. Now, even before that, before the Civil War video came out, we had another video called Imperial Summit 2023. And in that video, I say very, very clearly that we are intending to abandon the term micronation and micronationalism. I'll be putting out a video later on in the month so that we can have a fresh start in the new year. All of this took place before the Civil War video came out. All of this came out before the blowback that Selesnya and Neve are referring to happened.
So as the title of this video would suggest, we have come up with a name for the gathering that we are hosting next year, which is going to be called the Imperial Summit. Now, we've decided to call it the Imperial Summit over, say, Micro Summit or Micro Assembly or something of that nature, because going forward, in the new year in particular, we're going to try to rebrand ourselves to some degree or another in order to further differentiate the Empire of Stomaria and its member states from the wider micronational community. And I use community in the loosest possible term, because if anyone and their dog can describe themselves as a micronation just because they've raised a flag in their parents' backyard or claimed a public park, or they've posted a flag on Reddit or Twitter or Discord, if that is all micronationalism to some people or to a lot of people, And it's not something that we want to be affiliated with, because it has nothing to do with what Stomaria is. We are aspiring to become more self-reliant, to attain greater levels of self-determination through legal and legitimate means. We're trying to build real-world communities. We're trying to build cultural identities. We're striving to achieve something meaningful in the real world. And a lot of what the micronational community is doing just doesn't resonate with us at all. And while we are a micronation in the very literal sense of the word, we are an entity that is not sovereign, but we are nevertheless striving for that sovereignty. We might not necessarily attain it. We might be unsuccessful in a lot of our attempts to do so, but we are nevertheless working to take steps to accomplish this. And again, this is just not something that most micronations have the interest or capacity in doing. And so we are going to be trying to mitigate the inclusion of the terminologies micronation and micronationalism going forward, because I think it just does more harm than good. And our attempts in the past of trying to differentiate Stomaria from the wider micronational community is hampered by our own use of the term. So I will make a video about this going forward, but I just want to make it clear that the reason that we have settled on Imperial Summit is because this is going to be something that is unique to the Empire of Stomaria, its member states, its external allies and trade partners, micronations, that we do have a lot of time and respect for, that we are engaging in a proactive way. But going forward, don't be surprised if you see less and less terms like micronation and micronationalism used to describe the Empire of Stomaria from our own perspective, from our own publications.
So this was already in place. This was already the plan. Selasie's activities or condemnations or the condemnations of other people had absolutely nothing to do with it. What it did do, though, is highlight very clearly, for a lot of people, a very recent example of why we should just leave them to it. But it was by no means the only example. I could have used any number of examples throughout the 4 years or so that we've been identifying as a micronation.
Because nothing highlighted this further, for me personally, than over the last few days.
Oh boy.
Because during the Christmas period, specifically on Christmas Day, when I was having lunch with my family, when I was opening presents with my daughter, when I was just enjoying food, family, and fun, as a lot of people do during that time, there was a flurry of activity on various social media platforms, including and especially Reddit, where condemnations of Stomaria, as long as your arm, were being posted.
As far as I know, the only post that could be considered even a little bit long, posted over that time period, was my own. The one where I called out the Emperor for his cowardly preemptive blocking for me. So I can only logically conclude, he's talking about me here.
This is misinformation at its finest. Here's what I actually said.
Because nothing highlighted this further, for me personally, than over the last few days. Because during the Christmas period, specifically on Christmas Day, when I was having lunch with my family, when I was opening presents with my daughter, when I was just enjoying food, family, and fun, as a lot of people do during that time, there was a flurry of activity on various social media platforms, including and especially Reddit, where condemnations of Stomaria, as long as your arm, were being posted, and people were looking to declare war on Stomaria and egging each other on and saying we should be funding Sumerian rebels and take them on and then divvy up the territory of Stomaria. And this was on Christmas Day. And so I can only imagine that the individuals engaged in this sort of activity don't have a life. Condemnations of Stomaria, as long as your arm, were being posted and people were looking to declare war on Stomaria and egging each other on and saying we should be funding Sumerian rebels and take them on and then divvy up the territory of Stomaria.
As you can see, I was not referring to a single post. I was referring to multiple posts from 13-year-olds that were looking to declare war and carve up Stomarian territory and all the rest of the nonsense that I'm used to seeing time and time again. It had nothing to do with Selassie. It had nothing to do with Neve. Now, this shouldn't be coming as a major surprise to Neve, because she says in the video, and she's quite right, that I had blocked her on Reddit. So I wouldn't have been able to see whatever post that she made. I still haven't seen the post that she's made. Was it done on Christmas? I presume so, because that's what she goes on to talk about. She assumes that I'm talking about her. At least that's the impression she wants to give. Because clearly I was not talking about her. I was clearly talking about something else. She is simply taking the clip out of context, cut it, removed a segment of it to give the wrong impression. And this, as I say, is misinformation at its finest. It's fake news. And that can be seen throughout the entirety of this entire video that I've put together. Everything that I said originally is true. Everything she has come out with to say that's not true, I have proven to be false. And there will be people that watch this, but they still won't care. They will still consider Stomaria, we are the enemy, and therefore we must be opposed. But I have this all the time. I am the bastion of unfiltered truth. And it's a simple fact. I don't say something unless it's true. And I've repeated this time and time again. And in this entire video that we've done, we've seen it time and time again. I say something, I back it up with something. And I've done this again with Neve's latest video. But at this point, I think I've gone on long enough on this particular video of hers. It's a video built on mistruths, on misinformation, on lies. I've proven that time and time again, multiple times. And I just don't have time to nitpick every little aspect of this video that she's put out. But it is just built on a complete fairy tale, on a fabrication, on lie. And it's disappointing. It is, because there was a time where I actually liked Neve. I can't say I've ever said the same about Bran Howell, but Neve, I did generally quite like. And to see her come out with a video like this, and I suppose more shame on me for not responding to it sooner, or watching it sooner, to actually see what was being said about me. You know, it's just disappointing. I didn't smear Selassie or Bran Howell in any shape or form. I just told the truth. And this video has just reinforced that truth. And unfortunately, just have to undermine Selassie in the process because, well, that's what happens when you lie. Anyway, so, was this Stomaria's greatest mistake? Well, no. I mean, how can it be? There was an issue, I proposed a solution, the solution was ignored, they left. And what more could I have done, honestly? No one else offered a suggestion, a term, no one put a proposal forward, aside from change the structure of Stomaria the way I want it, or else. That was the ultimatum in the end. It was a threat of, if you don't do this, I will leave. I've made videos about this before. If that's going to come down to the wire, if that's the position they're going to take, I will never hesitate to cut loose member states, observer states, whoever else. If they make that ultimatum, they're going to go out the door, because I will never bow to the mob. I will never bow to pressure. If I do not want to do something with Stomaria, if I'm not comfortable with how Stomaria is going in terms of its governance, in terms of its direction, then I simply won't do it. And I will not be forced into a position where that will be changed, not by anyone, period. And so to have, you know, Bran Howell, who was an associated state for 5 weeks, I mean, there's no weight there. I was not overly concerned or impressed that they left. They didn't even make it to their first quarterly report to report on the land acquisition. So again, there was no loss there at all. Neve was more of a loss, but again, I mean, in the video, something I didn't cover, but she keeps referencing all of these skills and industries and all the rest of it that Selassie has and what she has. Literally, in 10 months, the only meaningful real-world interaction we had with Neve was when she sent me a golden griffin pin badge. I sent her a Stomarian stater coin. I think that was back in March or April 2022. And that was it. That was the only exchange that ever took place, period. There was no trade, no engagement. And even to this day, with Wayward being free to engage with Neve of Wayward, even then, absolutely no exchanges have taken place, no trade has taken place. And that's, what, 7 months, 8 months after Selassie left Stomaria. So, you know, I don't know what industries that she's referring to, or what benefit she thought she was providing to the Empire, or what loss that we actually endured, aside from someone that I did have some appreciation and respect for, someone that I did genuinely like at one point. But evidently what she constantly harks on about in terms of integrity and honor and truth, obviously these aren't that important after all. So with all that said, we move on to the final part of this video, the final episode of Stomaria's biggest mistake. And it won't surprise many to learn that this is going to be about Bran Howell. So we've come to the last, latest, and most concerning matter of contention of all, Bran Howell. So Bran Howell is a former associated state of the Empire of Stomaria. But even before they joined, I had grave reservations about them. So normally it's a cut and dry process. If someone wants to become a part of the Empire, if a nation wants to make a formal application, they will do so. They will then answer a few questions that I put to them. If I'm happy with the answers, I will have an interview with the leader of that nation. After I've had that interview with the nation, if I am again happy with everything, then I will introduce them all to the member states of the Empire. Once all of the member states of the Empire have been introduced to this new applicant, we will have a quick meeting to decide whether or not they're going to be a good fit. And then it's a yes or no. It's a very simple process. It takes about a week. In the case of the Republic of Vesta, for instance, I think it took about 5 days from the initial application beginning to the actual conclusion that the Republic of Vesta would be admitted into the Empire. With Bran Howell, it took 4 weeks. And there were 2 primary reasons for this. The first was that Bran Howell was not a micronation at that point. They hadn't come up with a flag, they hadn't even come up with a name, both of which they struggled to sort of conjure up. Initially, it was called the Branhal Estate, which again changed later on. And the flag, there was so much time spent on the flag in the sense that the central theme, the raven, he was never happy with the raven. And in the end, he actually said, just use the flag that I've got here, and then later on, I'll change it. So that was a bit of a red flag, as you can imagine. But that aside, the other reason that it took so long is that because I had many conversations with King Raoul of Wayward about this, because at the time we were the only ones dealing with this application process. Neve, who was a part of the Empire at the time, was feeling very unwell. I believe at the time it was struck down with COVID and she was very unwell. So we were spearheading this particular process, and we had a meeting with Branhal, and we spoke for hours, myself and Raoul, as to whether or not this was going to be a good idea, because I got some just really bad vibes about this entire thing. I just couldn't put my finger on it. Something just didn't feel right. I didn't like his mannerisms. I didn't like the region that he was in Transnistria, and the more I learned about it, the less I liked it, which we'll certainly get onto in a moment. I didn't like the idea of him constantly going on about encouraging the citizens of the Empire to move out in that direction. There was just a lot of red flags that I did not approve of, and it just didn't sit right with me. But for whatever reason, we gave him the benefit of the doubt. He scraped by the application process. It could have been a no from there, and it would have solved a lot of problems before they even started. But they did eventually become an associated state of Stomaria. In fact, as a part of the application process, I did actually insist that while we would be happy to make the citizens of the Empire aware of Branhal and where they are and potential opportunities, I did not want to actively encourage citizens of the Empire to move to Transnistria. And again, the reasons for that I will get onto in a moment, but long and short of it is, it can be a very turbulent place, or has the potential to be a very turbulent place, if not a potential war zone. And so I was not inclined to encourage people to move there. We will get into that in just a moment, though. But in the end, there isn't much I can say about Branhal as an associated state of the Empire, because they were only an associated state for 5 weeks before they left in December, along with Molossia. And during that time, they offered nothing. They contributed nothing, except for the introduction of an agenda for the Imperial Court meetings, because he kept rambling on about nothing for hours at a time and extending the length of the meetings to an incredibly unreasonable time. We had to introduce agendas to keep everything on track. So that's Branhal's lasting legacy in Stomaria. Because of his rambling nonsense, we had to introduce agendas into the process. So that's what we have now. Now, you'd think for someone that was only a part of the Empire for 5 weeks and then left wouldn't have a major story to tell, in the sense that it would have been a very minor event, barely even worth mentioning, frankly, in the great scheme of things. But unfortunately, because of the Transnistrian question, this did cause some problems. So without getting too much into the history of it, Transnistria is internationally recognized as a part of Moldova. However, they are nevertheless effectively a breakaway state. They are extraordinarily, fanatically pro-Russian, and they have sought to join with the Russian Federation. For context, the last referendum that took place in Transnistria, which saw, I believe, a 79% turnout, resulting in 98% of respondents voting yes to the question of whether or not Transnistria should join the Russian Federation. The government of Transnistria itself has repeatedly requested that Russia annex Transnistria formally. In fact, one of the last times they did this was in 2014, on the same day that Russia annexed Crimea, which should tell you all you need to know about the desires of the Transnistrian people and the Transnistrian government about integrating themselves into Russia. Indeed, the current Transnistrian president has already said in the past that Russia is their destiny, and that he would be willing to hold another referendum in Transnistria, but only if Russia will recognize the results and then act on it. Interestingly, Transnistria actually has 2 flags. This is the first one, and this is the second. You will probably recognize both. Further to this, Russia actually stations about 1,500 troops in Transnistria, and according to the Council of Europe, they actually consider Transnistria to be under Russian military occupation. And if you think about criticizing what Russia deems peacekeeping forces in Transnistria, then you can find yourself in jail for as long as 7 years. The UK government, along with many other governments around the world, issue warnings about travelling to Transnistria, because if you go to Transnistria and something happens, then they will be able to provide exceptionally limited consular support. It is an unrecognised breakaway state. In addition to this, Transnistria is obviously bordered to Ukraine, which happens to be a nation, as I'm sure you all know, that is currently being invaded by Russia. What's more, early on in the war, a Russian general went on to Russian state TV to go on record as saying that their intention and their hope was to create a land corridor across Ukraine to Transnistria. And it's only the blood of Ukrainian servicemen and civilians that is actually prohibiting that goal from taking place. And this is obviously much to the dismay of Transnistrians, because they are, as I say, fanatically pro-Russian. More recently, the government of Moldova, the nation that Transnistria is internationally recognized to be a part of, announced that they had actually quashed a Russian-backed coup. And this is on the back of Ukraine telling Moldova that they would be willing to use military force to expel the Russian forces from Transnistria if they request such assistance. So, you should be able to piece together by now that Transnistria is in the middle of a very precarious position. It has potential to become an extremely turbulent place, if not an active war zone, and it's for this reason that I did not want any Stomarian citizens, any Woodian citizens, any Slassian citizens, and all the rest to move to Transnistria, because it is a dangerous place to be. It has the very real potential to be a dangerous place. It is an attempted breakaway state with a population that wishes to be integrated into a belligerent nation which is currently invading its neighbour. I mean, I can't think of a more potentially turbulent place to be at the moment, aside from Ukraine itself. And so I did not want Branhal to be advertising this to the Stomarian community as a means of encouraging people to go there. And for those who are wondering why I am referring to the leader of Branhal simply as Branhal rather than his actual name, which I do know, it's because that he told me shortly before he left that he doesn't use his name in the public space because he's not sure how the Transnistrian authorities will treat the formation of a micronation in Transnistria. And at the same time, he's going around encouraging people to actually move and live there with him. And that's the next part of this little problem that we have going here. Because outside of the Empire, there were no such restrictions in terms of going on a massive recruitment campaign encouraging people to move to this paradise that he keeps harking on about. There's no building regulations, the land is cheap, the food is plentiful, so on and so forth. You've heard these sorts of stories before, I'm sure. The problem is that a lot of people do not associate Branhal with anything other than Stomaria, certainly up to a certain point in time. And had they not known that Branhal had left the Empire of Stomaria, they would naturally assume that Branhal was still associated with Stomaria, and so this recruitment campaign would be something that was encouraged or sanctioned by Stomaria itself. And I know this to be true because for a long time we were contacted by people who had seen posts or comments or are approached in some form or another by Branhal or indeed Selassie, and they wanted to know if it was true, if they could move to Transnistria and start a new civilization, start a new society. And this association with Stomaria was very concerning to me because I did not want people to move to Transnistria based on the assumption that it had something to do with us, because it doesn't, and it never will. And so I put out a video and I explained the situation, and that was that. I mean, there wasn't too much to it beyond that. I said, you shouldn't move to Transnistria because you believe that it has something to do with Stomaria, because it doesn't. And that was the crux of the issue. Now, don't get me wrong, if you want to roll the dice and move to an incredibly poor part of the world, which is, considered to be under Russian military occupation and is adjacent to an active war zone, with a population that's heavily pro-Russian and would like nothing better than to be annexed by Russia, if you want to move to that kind of place, then you go ahead. But don't do so because you think that it's something that I have encouraged, or Stomaria has encouraged, or is sanctioned, or is in some way okay with, because I'm not. And our hands on this matter are clean. And since we put out that video, only one other person has contacted us, to which we quickly corrected them in terms of how we're involved in that kind of process. The short answer being we're not. But when Bran Howell saw the video, which of course was perfectly factual, perfectly logical, and perfectly true, as all of our content always is, he decided to take a different approach to it. A very, again, logical, rational person that I've had to come across in this line of work, I suppose you'd call it. His rational approach to this was to have an image of a half-naked woman in chains with my face superimposed on it, and then he messaged me privately to show me this video, and I didn't respond. And then he said, well, I'm going to share it onto the subreddits on Reddit. I didn't respond. And so he posted them on there, and then he started calling me. And at night, I think it was like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. I think it was probably 11 o'clock when Transnistrian time. But I didn't answer. And the next day, it turns out that the moderators of the subreddits had removed the photos, and or the videos rather, and issued him a warning. So that was his rational response to that. But since then, I have received a flurry of messages and of links from people who have seen Bran Howell's commentary. So he uses a public Reddit account to promote Bran Howell in every shape and form, in every forum you can think of, by all accounts. But it's what he posts outside of that is a bit concerning, to me at least, in the sense that he'll think nothing of using the same account that he used to promote Bran Howell to show videos of butterflies copulating, or gummy bears engaging in sex acts. Someone sent me a link of Bran Howell viewing and commenting on pornographic material on Reddit, using the same account that he uses to promote Bran Howell with. I mean, that alongside the images of Lenin. He's built a little shrine to Lenin in his house as well. If you're in Transnistria, I suppose that's what you do. So yeah, I mean, had Bran Howell not left the Empire, he would have been expelled 10 times over. It's as simple as that, really. And this is the reason why, with Molossia, for instance, we could never affiliate with Molossia, even in spite of even if you put aside the video content that they put out regarding us, which is obviously, as I've just gone over, complete fabrication. We could never affiliate with Molossia in any formal capacity, period, because Bran Howell actually now forms a part of Molossia. I think they're a province of Molossia or something to that effect. Maybe their standards are different in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. But as I say, they would have been expelled from the Empire 10 times over had they not left of their own accord for these sorts of activities. It'd just be a constant source of embarrassment, and I don't need that. I don't need the aggravation of someone like that within the Empire. And I will never allow someone like that to be associated with our community again, in the sense that it'll be a cold day in hell before Bran Howell comes anywhere near the Empire in any shape or form, either indirectly or otherwise. And so I suppose the question that you ask yourself here is, was this Stomaria's greatest mistake? And the answer is yes. I should never have allowed Bran Howell to become associated with Stomaria, with the Empire. Not only because he's a very strange individual who would have been expelled anyway, but because this is the only instance where, as the Emperor of Stomaria, I've ever become concerned about other people's well-being because of what we're doing. In the sense that because were being indirectly associated with this recruitment campaign to this, poor, region which is under Russian military occupation, an attempted breakaway state, fanatically pro-Russian, adjacent to a war zone, legally, internationally recognized as a part of Moldova, which in itself was having a, Russian-backed coup taking place. nothing about it is safe. And I wouldn't want anyone to throw away everything in an attempt to go and move out there unless they particularly wanted to be associated with the Russian Federation in some form or another. But that all by the by. Yes, Branhau was definitely the biggest mistake that Stomaria ever made. And this was down to a lack of judgment on my part. As I said earlier, every alarm bell was ringing, and I ignored it to progress a little bit further, to have that much more land, to have that much more territory, and it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it at all. And because of that, in part at least, we have strengthened our resolve further in terms of tightening the application process and the criteria that we look for when people become involved in Stomaria in a full capacity. If they apply to become an observer state, or apply to become a member state, or apply for an alliance or a friendship agreement or something like that, our criteria only got more strict after Branhau in particular left, and also Molossia, and there's good reason for it. So, with all of that said, I think we're done here at long last. So if you did enjoy this video and you wanted to support Stomaria and show your support for Stomaria, then please feel free to give this video a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll catch you in the next one.